Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode.
Rock and roll the place.
All right. Yeah, I didn't. This morning I woke up and I was like, oh, it's Tuesday. We're recording. I wonder if he wants to talk about that book we talked about discussing. But thank God for Audible.
Mm-hmm.
I usually use Spotify, but it was wanting me to pay for it, which was silly.
Outrageous.
I also pay for Audible, but I had unused credits.
Gotcha.
And I listened to it twice.
Nice. Yep. So this is the book.
That looks like the world's oldest book. Just looks old.
It's from This version is from 1983.
Oh, so it's older than me.
Yes. Actually, this is the 50th anniversary of this. 2024 was.
Is there a new copy release?
They did
release.
Already gotten it? I did not.
Oh, I'm surprised.
I probably should, just to be a completist.
You say a completist?
Right, because I have all of his books. Yeah, this sparked an inner game revolution. Yeah. So he followed up the inner game of tennis with inner game of golf, inner tennis, playing the game, which is actually great, not redundant. Then inner skiing.
I didn't think they were as obscure sports though.
And the inner game of music.
I never see you with an Apple Watch on.
Today's the first. Yeah, I charged it, so
new.
It was good to go. It had been laying there uncharged for like a month. But yeah, inner game of stress, inner game of work. I think he's got seven, I think. But this was hugely impactful for me. Chad Willis, who I think at the time he gave it to me, was an assistant. He was either assistant volleyball coach at Wake Forest or at App State, one of the two. Now he's the head coach.
Oh, like Chad.
Yeah.
Oh.
Now he's head coach at Georgia Southern. He's been there 6 years or so, but he's definitely a student of the game, student of coaching, very thoughtful. And so he recommended the inner game of tennis to me many moons ago, and I was just blown away by it. And some of it, because of some of like the martial arts background stuff I'd been exposed to, had some of that, because this does wind up being very Zen-like. It lines up with, like Zen and the Art of Archery, or Tao the Jump Shot, or Jane Story's books, Breathe Golf and Connected Golf, and The Athlete's Ascent, it's the latest. But this, came out in the mid-'70s, where not a lot of these kind of books were in existence. And yes, we are talking about a book that is considerably older than you are.
It's not considerably, though.
It's
older.
Definitely older. And
younger
than me. But it sold millions of copies. Very popular, and it had a huge impact on me.
Was it a hit right off the bat?
Pretty much.
Even though it was tennis specific, people quickly realized it was above and beyond just tennis applicable.
And I mean, it picked up steam for sure as kind of more and more people started thinking about these things. In the coaching profession, there just became more and more of an emphasis on learning how to be a more effective coach and coaching methods, things like that. And this was, pretty revolutionary and had a huge, huge effect on the business. And he had played tennis. He played tennis at Harvard, captain of their tennis team there. But he did start, he missed a shot, that he thought he was able typically to hit. He started kind of wondering, why is this happening?
Yeah.
And that kind of led to this, the heck is going on kind of mentality and long search for truth and knowledge. And I think that's where it really paid off for him. And there's still like the Inner Game Institute, and he's 86, maybe, still alive and well and doing it.
Yeah.
So pretty inspirational in that regard. What did you think is this your first time listening to it?
This was my first time listening. When I listened to it once, I thought it would take longer, so I had it on like high speed. Then I was like, oh, I can like regular speed this. Because he opens with the example of the tennis pro coaching, the guy who wants to like be better at the club, and then like he says that it's a very day like a housewife who wants to play double Spartans with her husband. I actually thought the interesting part was when he said that as the coach or as the pro, finding that saying less did more was like a bit of an ego hit in a way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, I don't know if ego hit is the right word, but it made him think of like, oh, like maybe I'm not really. I think he talked to the tennis pro that was working with the businessman, like having to justify the cost of his hourly rate or whatever.
Yes.
And so he felt compelled to keep giving advice. So it seemed like every dollar you're spending, I'm going to make a comment or whatever it is. And I think it does take this is certainly something that's helpful for athletes to work on their mental game, but also for coaches to see how that like constant feedback and interruption and correction or adjusting, whatever, however you want to phrase what it is you think you're providing for them, can actually take away from their ability to get in that flow state and be able to just do what they need to do.
If you think about like when you were an athlete, I'm pretty sure you were not coached like this.
Maybe by you. I mean, like, I don't know that in the
Yeah.
moment I knew it, but like, you were certainly the least talkative coach of everyone I ever had, as far as like directionally speaking.
Yeah.
So,
but
what was your question?
Generally, I was just wondering how you experienced like
Yeah.
that kind of coaching that lead to frustration, where there
Oh,
times
yeah.
where, like this. That's I would like
Well,
you to.
I think,
I'd like to hear more.
yeah, there's probably a lot of angles to answer this. So the first one is, I think, as players, knowing them, like, I'm a recovering people pleaser. That's how I like to put that. And so it's almost like I thrive off of feedback, but it also is very disruptive in a way. It's like
Right.
having some sort of reinforcement is helpful as a people pleaser, but the constant feedback, I know for me, especially playing in college, there was a like constant technical adjustments, or I mean, anger, frustration from coach for not performing one single play and not giving you the chance to, like, you're going to make mistakes, especially in a sport like volleyball, like that fast, and any fast-paced sport, things are going to happen. And I think that constant feedback, or the initial like yank you out of the game because you made a mistake, is you don't it doesn't let you get into that state of, okay, I made a mistake. I think it's important for athletes or anyone to be able to say, okay, I made a mistake and I saw myself recover, and so that I know that I can. Like, I think that's that in between of, if all you do is make a mistake and then you either get yelled at or scolded or yanked out of the game, that reinforces like, I failed, I failed, I failed.
Right.
And there was no chance to redeem. And I think as coaches giving, I mean, some reasonable amount of time, if kids just having a crap day, then like at some point you got to pull the plug, right? But I think allowing for the player to work through their own redemption phase is hugely important. But that can't be with the constant chit-chattering of, here's how you can redeem yourself, right? Like, and like you said 100 million times, if coaches put in the work in practice, game day should just be letting it show. So I felt like, as someone who both loves and hates feedback, excessive feedback is very problematic, especially during game day.
Yeah, and I think even in a practice or lesson setting, that feedback prohibits learning.
Right.
Which, in theory, as teachers or educators, that's not the goal. We don't want to inhibit learning. As coaches, we don't want to get in the way of improvement. And he starts off that book talking about feeling the need to justify, which anybody who's ever given a private lesson,
oh yeah,
for sure.
Yep.
And I want to look like I'm engaged.
Well, I think whether it's a private lesson where you're getting paid extra outside of your normal stuff, or just being a coach, like, people feel like they have to justify their own imposter syndrome, frankly, or whatever it is, that you think I have to justify why I'm qualified to do this, rather than coach the way it's going to be best for the kids and then let their performance show that I was, the example in the very, I don't know if it's chapter 1 or 2, they felt so brief I couldn't tell which was which. I think it was the businessman wanted to play better at the club. He said he just, rather than telling him like do this and that and that, he just did a backswing or whatever. I'm not a tennis player, so my lingo here is going to be real crappy. And he just asked the guy, like, what did you notice? And he said, well, I noticed that your feet did whatever. And so he said, okay, now you do it. He didn't give him any direction. He just asked the guy to, like, what did you see in what I just did? And he said, I moved my feet. And the guy did took his back swing or whatever the frick it was. And he's like, he, being the coach in that setting, was like, it was a pretty much perfect swing, but he didn't move his feet. So the one thing that he identified and said, well, I noticed this, he didn't do. And so I think that was the connection of, when we're, even if it's the right thing to do, when you put it in your head of like, move your feet, do this, it's like that you tend to not do. Same with the housewife. She kept saying she was hitting the frame of the racket, and he told her to intentionally hit the frame, and then she's hitting it on the strings. Like, it was just sort of that, almost do the opposite. And when you're in your own head of saying, like, I need to do this right, whether it's you in your own head or coach reminding you, turn your outside hand in or whatever it is, it's very hard when you're focused on that one thing, because I think it puts too much focus there and maybe takes you out of the flow state of the other things that you're doing well. And
no question.
It may not be that turning your hand in on the block is the problem, Because if you're trying to focus on that and everything else falls apart, well, then you have a new problem. So I think there's certainly a feedback issue.
Well, the whole idea, like I think we coach from what yeah, I think he talks about it. I don't know. I've read every one of his books, listened to a million podcasts, so I'm not sure exactly where he talked about it, but a shouldn't version of performance where this is what it should look like.
Mm.
You're not doing it, or it shouldn't look like that. You should be doing this instead. And I think that is very difficult for whatever the performer is.
Yeah.
To not internalize that, feel judged, go ahead, because it piles on to all the judging I'm already doing naturally.
Well, my boss said one time, I'm sure she didn't invent this, someone else did, but she said that the word should is could with shame.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah,
I really, I
heard
think
that.
that's like just, I was always thinking about when you were saying that was like when you're telling someone like you should be doing this, like or
Right.
that's the same version of like, better. And you're failing. To me, like saying you should, it's like I should exercise. Well, that makes that you're saying that you should be doing something. Like you either can or you can't. Like you can go do it and make it happen, or like the should kind of has that like I should, but I'm choosing not to, kind of judgmental shame in a way. Whereas
Yeah, and it would be one thing
I
if
know you can do better. I've seen you do it. Kind of
we
support.
just automatically accepted critique with a blissful joy and spirit of gratitude, and yes, he's unlocked the key for me, and now. But
Thank you for that
instead,
advice.
yeah, instead it's I knew I wasn't any good, or whatever, or judgmental approach that causes tension and thinking, which you ain't going to be in any kind of zone with that going on, just not happening. And so while we're feedback on every rep, which I've seen many, many times over the years, you're just guaranteeing that they're thinking about what they're doing and not even approaching like playing freely.
Right.
So there we are. We're an obstacle to a peak performance kind of
Instead of
experience.
a support system.
Yeah. Instead of allowing this to occur, we want to create an environment where people can do that instead of constantly correcting and kind of validating our own position there.
I think too, like the validation's the right word we should have been using the whole time for that mindset of coaches. But I think too, in the case where maybe a coach hears this and it's like, oh, like maybe I should. If you suddenly stop giving any feedback, that's going to be a different reaction from your team as well. So I think trying to find that transition from one coaching style to another, like ideally, you should just be able to stop giving feedback. But when your players are used to constant stuff and then there's nothing, they're going to wonder. So I think it requires some communication about understanding
like,
what the change is, why we're making this
doing.
change. Yeah, here's why.
Well, I remember I was giving a private lesson to Paige Gillen. She played at Triangle, went on to play at Penn, really good player, very bright. She's a pin hitter, and I had to tell her what I was doing. Like, okay, for the next 15 swings, I'm not going to say anything. And I just want you to feel it, see it in your head. If you want to think about it between reps, fine. Do not be thinking about.
Yeah, just do.
Just kind of be aware. And, if I hadn't done that, she might have thought I was bored or not paying attention or something. And I think because it is somewhat unusual, I think the point about communicating what you're doing and why is very important. And I think I've mentioned this story before, but I was kind of pinch hitting for a club coach at a big tournament one year, and an outside hitter came off the court and kept begging for feedback. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. I really need to hear that.
That's a different angle.
And I was like a little taken aback. And so my goal for I think 4 days of that tournament, by the last day, I don't want her needing me to be doing that. And so it took a little work, and we talked about it. But I think there's just a fundamental lack of understanding of what produces quality performance if we think that a constant feedback, even in a practice setting, is going to facilitate learning. It is not. It just is going to give them all kinds of things to think about.
I think information overload. Like we live in a society of information overload.
Yep.
Visually in our ears, and like on our phones, on our computers, everywhere we look, it's information overload. And like our brains weren't meant to process that much information that quickly. But thinking about parents and babies or toddlers, well, you can't give but so much feedback if they don't understand what you're saying, right? But when my kids were learning to walk, just come
Yeah.
on, you got it. I'm not left foot, right foot. Like, nope, stand
Right.
up straight or
Well,
use
he
your
even talks
engage
about
your
that.
glutes, right? Like,
And,
no, you
yeah.
don't, you can't give that level of direction, and so you just support and you show, and suddenly they learn how to walk, right? Like, it's not. I mean, and there are certainly parents who over feedback their children, but I think
Well, yeah.
letting them fall, letting them scrape
Yep.
their knee. Like I remember to this day the first knee scrape Pepper got because she learned how to walk, and we went outside, and I always didn't want to go outside because I was like she's gonna fall on the concrete and scrape her knee. But like the only way to learn not to fall on the concrete, so you don't scrape your knee, is to fall and scrape your knee and learn how that happened, right?
That's kind of harsh.
No, I mean, it was
I'm
almost
kidding.
like I have a
Yeah.
picture of it because it was almost like I mean, not like I was proud of her for that, but she recovered from it, and we were sort of moving on. So it's one thing to walk around the house, hold onto the furniture, and then walk on the rugs that's soft, and then walk on the hardwoods. But it was like this sudden freeing of like she's done it. We got through all the challenges of that without this constant like protection and buffering and cushion that
Yeah.
I don't think is required.
No, I can still, I remember years ago, I think it was like year 2 of me coaching high school baseball. And a young man had come out for the team. He's a senior. He's a great athlete, really good basketball player. His name was Robert Two, and decided he wanted to play baseball. And he had played when he was younger. And I can still remember this. I'm throwing bat in practice. He is just crushing balls all over the place. And so I start to try and fix what he's doing wrong. And the more correction I gave, then it was swing,
Unless
miss,
he's
swing,
crushing
miss,
balls.
swing, miss. No more contact, no nothing. And it didn't take very long for me to realize like I was goofing this kid up. So I just stopped. I said, Robert, forget everything I
sorry.
just said. Like, ignore everything I just said and just
Do what you were doing.
keep seeing it and hitting it.
Yeah.
And then I went back to line drives all over the park, and he had a great year for us.
I think it goes back to that like pathways in your brain. Like again, now if you practice crappy over and over again, you're gonna also ingrain that. But that sort of like getting into the muscle memory of how to do things requires repetition in a way, and uninterrupted sort of repetition to where it might not just be like, okay, do this on repeat over and over and over. You need different scenarios in which you can apply that. But when you're focusing on, a specific aspect of a skill, like one piece of that skill, if it's a multifaceted skill you're working on, the other things fall to the wayside. When you're overthinking this one portion of this overall sort of big picture skill, your body kind of forgets you're putting it out of whack. You got to have everything, in my mind, just doing what you know how to do.
And if you're learning a skill, thinking about how you're going to do it is pretty much going to guarantee you're not going to do it very well. So seeing it, like I remember when I taught my daughter, she 2 weeks before basketball season in 6th grade said, I think I'm going to go out for basketball. And she never played. I remember thinking, well, she should probably at least know how to do a layup. So we were in our driveway, and I did a couple layups to show her. I showed her a little 2-minute video
Yep.
on my phone, and then I said, okay,
Try it.
do it. And I didn't say a word. And it was in 10 or 15 minutes total, she was doing layups like she'd been doing them her whole
Yep.
life. And just allowing learning to take place goes back to the walking thing or the crawling thing. That's how it happens.
Yep.
They look around, they see how it's being done, and they start trying to do it.
Yep.
And there's no judgment in play to cripple performance and suck all the fun out of it and get in the way of learning taking place. So even though we, obviously as coaches, we mean well, we want to help kids get better. Sometimes when we're operating from our own insecurities or our own ego, we kind of feel the need to always be talking.
Mm-hmm.
And that guarantees no flow state is happening, no in the zone is happening. You're just a distraction.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I always think of this example, Zen and the Art of Archery, where this guy had gone overseas trying to learn this, and it was taking some time. But he was coming at this from a very analytical approach, and he just was not understanding. And so one day he goes to his teacher's house and is kind of agitated and frustrated, and his teacher takes him in the back where he has an archery thing set up. There's a target, and he demonstrates what he's been trying to get this man to understand, and he blindfolds himself, shoots an arrow right into the middle of the target, and then he shoots another arrow that goes right through the arrow that's in the middle of the target, and he can't see what he's doing at all. and Bing, lights go on and the student understands, grasshopper understands, or
Yep.
whatever. That's a great book. But that's one, I think, what we're capable of if we're left to learn and experience and grow is absurd. And the things that get in the way of that all come back to what's going on in our head. And I mean, there are a ton of instructional videos and books and magazine articles and podcasts that talk about how to improve a physical performance, like from a technical standpoint. I know I can't remember if he talks about it in this. Maybe it was Inner Game of Golf, I guess, where like Ben Hogan wrote this really famous book, kind of how to, and he described like step by step exactly how this golf swing should occur. It's like there's no way you can read that and like, okay,
Right. Right.
it's just not possible. As opposed to seeing it, feeling it, and kind of being able to constantly have this visual in your head and this feeling of freedom. Same thing goes like in the Tao of the jump shot. There's a chapter in there where he like breaks down the entire jump shot, and I almost think like, okay, but you could probably erase that. But then there's the rest of it is like, pretty perfect in terms of how you should be feeling in all of this. And Gallwey's point about the less I talk, the better they got is huge. That's where he realized I can't let my ego get in the way of
They're learning. Yeah.
And it's, do I value my role in this, like me getting credit for this happening,
or producing someone who can do what it was I was supposed to teach them to do,
or helping someone improve. And that's the once he moves into chapter 2, he talks about kind of the conversation that takes place in our head, and what are you doing, and what's wrong with you, and that sucked, and getting to the brass tacks of it, like where there's two selves, whether it's a left brain, right brain thing, or he doesn't call it that. He calls it self one, self two. Self one is like the controlling, instructing, judging version of us, and then there's the self two, which is kind of the unconscious flow state performer. And the goal becomes diminishing the impact that self one has in this process. And that's where like this feedback thing comes in, even if it's like positive critiquing. That one was really good.
Right. You're it's just another way of saying the other one was bad.
Yeah.
That's really all that is.
And you wind up chasing, like, because we all want affirmation. We all want somebody to say nice things to us, and to think we're doing well, especially like players and coaches. They automatically want their coach to think they're doing well.
Sure.
I'll get to play more or whatever, and it just distracts. And there's so many thought patterns that are coming into play that do not need to be there. And never mind if you're saying something critical and even negative. I mean, I've seen, like, I remember, I won't say the coach's name, but it was a major Division I volleyball coach. And when everything was going well, his body language and things he would say, great. As soon as it was not, man, it was really ugly. And he was brilliant. I mean, I went to his coach's clinic and learned a lot about volleyball, but his body language and demeanor on the sidelines, the way he comported himself, was just like,
he didn't need to say anything.
All these terrible vibes going out there. And you talk about creating a self one monster that, see, look over there. You're like, you're not going to be starting, or you're going to lose your scholarship, or whatever. Like all these things that some even irrational that pop into your head. And I'm sure that was not his intention. But that's where ego and trying to justify your presence on the sideline, that stuff can really get in the way if you're not aware. And then I do remember it was a volleyball playoff game, and the whole match I pretty much just sat there and took notes. And
I was just going to say, I'm picturing Russ Rose on the bench. Just, just looking up from his glasses and, his little notebook.
And, between sets, I would get up and say something. But after the match, a parent from the other team came over who knew me from club, and I noticed that you just didn't say anything. Like I said, well, I do what they need me to do.
I think from coming from the ego perspective, or that needing to justify your worth perspective of a coach, I actually think that for a coach who can just sit there and let their team do it, that speaks way louder than the coach who's like, I call it parenting out loud, like the parents who are just like, oh, make sure you like. I
Right.
hear that.
Yeah.
Oh, so gross. It's like the parents who say things to the kids to make sure that everyone around them knows that like, oh, this is our rule. Same goes for coaches who are constantly just like saying things to be saying things that aren't helpful. In my mind, when you sit there and watch it, and it took me a long time to figure this out. And it was specifically as Russ Rose, who I'm thinking of, because this was the first person I was like, oh, he really just like sits there. And it took me a while to realize that like it's because he doesn't need to do anything in this moment.
Well, it's very true, and
There's
that's
nothing for him to do, and so he's going to sit there.
I've even seen some coaches. Well, they'll come on. We talked about this. Like
My brother.
absolving themselves of responsibility,
Yes.
letting everyone know that
And that's what it
it's
is
just
from a parenting perspective. I'll be like to his 3-year-old, buddy, remember what we talked about last Tuesday on the way home from school?
nope.
Nope. What's Tuesday, Dad? Like, right. So it's that just like reinforcing to everybody else that we're
Yeah.
working on handling this, when the reality is like that didn't solve it. Anyway, I was thinking about when my husband's, this is like still like the pain point for him, but when my daughter was learning how to ride her bike, and he looked up like, how to help kids ride their bike, right? He's looking at these techniques to help them, and one of them, and he wanted this to be his thing, so I just was very hands off, which is usually hard for me, but I was like, it was to put her on the bike, no training wheels, and to put a towel under her armpits, and then he would like hold it up to kind of like help hold her body weight so she could just do the pedaling thing without having to balance yet. And I'm like, okay, like that's got to be exhausting for your arms for starters, but go for it. And they would do it for like 10 minutes every couple days. Like nothing, no progress is being made. And I'm like watching this, like I'm just letting it happen. So a few weeks goes by and she keeps wanting to practice, and like every time she wants to practice, Jeff's like, oh god, it's so much work to do the towel thing. And so one day she wanted to practice, and I was like, I'll do it. He went to go like take a shower or something, and I'm like, get on the bike. And like kids' bikes come with a little handle behind the seat for you to hold on to. So I'm like, get rid of the towel. I'm like, get on the bike, sit, and I'm helping it balance. And I'm like, start pedaling, and I'm just jogging behind her, holding the balance. Like, and like my one arm is not particularly strong enough to like balance this, but she's clearly doing it on her own. I'm just helping the last little like extra wiggles. And I mean, you see how long my street is. She gets like halfway up that arm of the street, and like I'm like in my mind she's got it, but she's still like, don't let go, don't let go. So the whole way back, which is sort of downhill somewhat from that side of the street down to our house, she's doing it, and I'm barely. So by the time we get to the end of the street, I let go. But I'm still jogging next to her with my arm like there, so she thinks I'm holding it. Like one pass of the holding the thing, she's riding the bike. And Jeff comes out so pissed at me that like, what did you do? I just let her do it. I just let her do it. And instead of giving the direction and like, I'm sure that towel trick worked for somebody, which is why it's out there on the internet. I don't know. I understand the concept of that. But when it didn't give her the opportunity to feel what it feels like to ride a bike, it gave her the opportunity to learn what it feels like to ride a bike with your weight off the bike and your arms in this awkward position, right? So it didn't give that true feeling of like, what does it feel like to do this thing? Just like when you're in practice versus in a game, if you're used to constant feedback or you're used to no feedback, when it's time to switch environments, you don't know how to do it with or without that support. And to me, it's like the constant, whether it's for, I think people hear the word ego too and always assume it has like negative intent. I think it's just like we all have an ego. Like, I don't think it's always negative. But I think justifying your existence is probably the better way to think about that. But we just don't have to. I don't think that athletes always need the reinforcement we think they need.
Well, no, they definitely don't. There's a great scene in the movie What About Bob, where
Never thought we referenced that one.
the father of this young boy is a psychiatrist, and Bob is Bob Wiley, who's one of his patients. Somehow he's invaded their family vacation up on this lake, and the father's been trying to teach his son how to dive off the dock, and it's not working. He's trying to give him lots of instruction. The kid gets very tense and just stops and bails every time. So then one day Bob's just out there and offering no instruction, really, begging him not to jump in, and in he goes. He just boom, dives in, and the dad comes running down. I got it from here. I got it. He still wants to take some credit or whatever. That movie is hilarious. But that's a great example of that kind of, whether it's parenting, coaching, where we're just trying to inject ourselves into this process that
we might not need to be part of.
Most of the time, yeah. And that doesn't mean there aren't technical things to learn and technical improvements to be made, but it doesn't happen with a barrage of technical instruction. And I tend to always phrase these things as a question. Once plus, often they know how to do it if you just give them room to
Right.
do it. But not, I mean, that obviously not always. When you're learning a skill for the first time, but then just having them be more and more aware so that they can self-correct as opposed to bombarding them with
I think
information.
I think the ability to self-correct is a skill that is. I think you're teaching more of that skill than the technical skill of the sport itself. Like when you have an athlete who knows how to self-correct or knows how to like this observing without judgment. I saw some it's observation without judgment. If you let an athlete observe what happened without judgment from you or from self, even if that kid knows how to not judge themselves, if they know that coach is judging or a teammate or somebody, it's hard not to think about that, right? Like I think facilitating an environment where it's not a judgmental observation of what's happening facilitates and puts that kid in an environment where they can self-correct. They can just observe. Okay, something went wrong. What was different about that play or that swing? Okay, autocorrect. And it becomes way more natural than needing to like seek feedback from the sideline or expect to hear it in your ear or have players or coaches give it to you. And I think facilitating an environment where you can learn to problem solve. I mean, that is I think that's a big thing that a lot of kids lack these days is ability to like critically think and then solve a problem.
Yeah, but when it comes to this kind of skill acquisition, it will happen naturally.
Right.
Once they have a sense of how this should look like, what's the most effective way? Now I will say, like the baseball example I referenced earlier, I wouldn't necessarily teach someone that way to do it, but it was working. And then when you flick on TV and you look at major league hitters, everything right up until the point where they're mid swing or whatever, or they begun their swing, there's all kinds of variations. Now things really look the same when they're contacting the ball quite often. But even like my son's just started getting pitching instruction, and the coach who he's working with is awesome. Pitched for the Dodgers and scout for the Dodgers. His name's John Link. But he talked about like, well, we'll have to wait until he hits puberty and is grown, and then we find his natural arm slot and things like that. Like it's rather than force it into like everyone into this same arm slot, starting when you're 11 or 12. Right. And I think that's where he's not. He's a student of the game, this coach, and then two, he's not trying to squeeze everybody into this cookie cutter. I remember watching a attacking video from volleyballs a long time ago. It was a VHS tape, and I won't say which coach it was, but it was a big deal. And every hitter in that video looked exactly the same. I mean, from the color of their hair on down, like, and never mind their approach and arm swing, and it was
so
kind of
formulaic.
surreal. And so maybe he just recruited kids who all swung. And don't get me wrong, there are definite musts when it comes to volleyball swing to ensure shoulder health and all that. So I'm not being critical that they all look the same necessarily, but it was amazing to see that they all looked the same. Now, maybe that's what they're modeled, and that's the whole 9 yards. Sure. Plus, there is, when it comes to shoulder health, there are a lot of things that you shouldn't do if you want to take a lot of swings over a long period of time. But I think the big point of chapter 2 is becoming aware that you're having this conversation in your head, and the self-one critical approach, it just doesn't help you perform your best. And whereas self-2 is kind of this natural, unhindered, free expression of who you are as a player.
And I don't think either that it's that like self-one, I may have them in the wrong order, the one of yourselves is like, I can do this, and it's positive, and the other one's negative.
Right.
It's not those two, because even if you shut off the negative and you're constantly being like, I can do this, you're saying it because you think you can't. And so you're trying to force yourself, right? I think it is that very distinct difference of the judgmental side and then the unencumbered, just doing it side. Those are the two people within, not, angel and devil kind of thing. It's very much a free-flowing state, and then the judgmental, and we got to get rid of that one.
Well, and I remember hearing Jane Story talk on a podcast about this very thing with samurai. She goes, can you imagine a samurai like standing there saying, you can do it, you can do it. Like, there, it does not happen. Right. Like in their training, And I thought that was hilarious when she said that. But I think learning the way they learn, that is it to me.
Yep.
Like that's this very much visual and awareness without judgment and removing judgment, whether it is good or bad. Like, yay, that was awesome. You're the best. Okay. Then what
Just
happens?
ridding yourself of critique in general.
Right. And just seeing, feeling, learning, and allowing learning to take place. And when we become aware of the fact that the self one is talking to someone, like we're talking to ourselves sort of, but it's talking to the
two-person conversation.
Yes. The performing part of us is on the receiving end of this. And that's where I think that now we'll explode into this more. I'm super excited about all of this because I think it's really important. And as popular as this book is, when I look around and see coaching, whether I don't care what it is, whether it's athletics or musical instrument or dance or the business world, the more we can become aware of this self one, self two kind of conversation that's occurring all day long, the more we can kind of manage that much better.
I was thinking also, as far as this book series, I think it's important we share. It's not, if you want to read the book, by all means read the book along with us. But when it comes to the series, breaking it down, the books that we talk about repeatedly is not necessarily so people can read along with us. If they want to, that's great. But to really be able to say, hey, these are books that we think are like pinnacle in this subject, and we're going to really do the breaking down for you. So this is not intended to be book club where you have to read along and participate in the conversation, but we're breaking these books down because we know that what's inside is important, and hopefully we can sort of be the cliff better than cliff notes, but the
this book is this version is 141 pages.
Yeah, I think it took me about 12 minutes to listen to the first 2 chapters on audiobooks, so that's your jam too. It's faster, but
nice. But yeah, I know a lot of people don't take in information by reading books, which is why we have a podcast. That's how I got talked into it. So
I got talked into it?
Awesome. Yeah, I did have to get talked into it.
I know the podcast, but oh yeah, you're right. That was kind of the whole thing.
Russell Thomas and you.
Yeah, not everyone's going to read it. It's a good thing you did.
Well, yeah, I love reading, so that's that. All right, stay tuned. See you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.